Just about a week ago, we heard that a scientist, one of the leading scientists on gender dysphoria, was suspended from Twitter for saying that it was a mental disorder. And the truth is, it is. It's listed in the DSM-5. I'm not completely familiar with what that is, so, don't hold that against me. I'm not a scientist. But this individual, Ray Blanchard, I believe his name is, Dr. Blanchard, is the one of the foremost experts. Now, naturally, many in the trans community and on the woke left don't like him. And I'm not here to defend him as the herald of truth or anything, but no, he's a researcher and one of the leading researchers on gender dysphoria and trans issues. And it actually sounds like he's tried to be somewhat sympathetic to the politics and the activists. But the issue we have here is that Twitter actually suspended this guy's tweet, where he said, quote, "My beliefs include the following 6 elements. 1. Transsexualism and milder forms of gender dysphoria are types of mental disorder which may leave the individual with average or even above average functioning in unrelated areas of life." I don't necessarily understand what he's trying to say there. Above average functioning, I'm not sure what that means. But that tweet resulted in a suspension. So we can then see this. Ray Blanchard, PhD, you have violated our rules against hateful conduct. This story, by the way, is from CNS News. That tweet that I just read you was taken down for hate speech, for stating a scientific fact. And this is what's worrisome to me when we have this conversation about science denialism on the left. It exists. And in fact, Twitter's rules can be weaponized against facts and scientists. What happens then is, what we're seeing is the politicization of science. Now, of course, science has always been political. Going back to the story of the heliocentric universe and the geocentric, universe and things like that. Yes, people who try to put forth, certain ideas would be mocked and ridiculed because often these ideas conflict with the agendas of individuals. This is why it's so important to respect the scientific process, recognizing that scientists are often wrong, and that's what makes science work. Constantly improving and recognizing your mistakes. I'll read a little bit from CNS News, but we'll move on to, we have an interview with Ray Blanchard from the National Review, which he makes some interesting points that I want to read on. The story says, Blanchard's post is presented in this article. It is not clear where he engages in hateful conduct or seeks to promote violence against, threaten, or harass anyone. Apparently, just stating that transsexualism is a mental disorder is hateful conduct. Yes, and that's the point. Dr. Blanchard earned his AB in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and his PhD from the University of Illinois. He was the chief of clinical sexology services in the law and mental health program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Ontario from 1995 to 2010. We can see Ray Blanchard was reinstated. Twitter has unlocked my account and graciously apologized for their error. My sincere thanks to the people who expressed their concern during the past 24 hours. They go on to say that he's currently a professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto, Blanchard's specialty, and most of his research over the years concerns gender identity disorders and transsexualism. What's interesting is that following this, there were some people who tweeted, gender dysphoria is a mental disorder. But here's the thing. One of the reasons why I believe this is because of Blanchard, but we'll read some of his personal statements in the matter. But I looked into this and I tried to understand why is it that you actually do have trans activists defending the idea that gender dysphoria is a mental disorder. And it's very simple. For people to get care, to get the medication they want, to get the surgery they want, it needs to be a medical condition. There are actually activists who want gender dysphoria to be removed from the DSM-5. Again, I don't know what DSM-5 means, like the acronym or whatever, but it's a list of mental disorders, includes schizophrenia. That's my understanding. If that were to be removed from mental disorders and officially determined not to be a mental disorder, then you end up with trans individuals who want to get medication who won't be able to in some circumstances. So it's actually an activist-y thing to defend this. You can see the contradictory nature of those who want, the moral satisfaction of claiming that's not a mental disorder. And you can even, it's weird. I mean, welcome to politics in whatever, this era is crazy. But let's head over to this National Review article. Meet the bold sexologist questioning transgender orthodoxy. I actually don't think that's kind of a fair statement to make. I think he's the leading most expert. He's not questioning it necessarily. He's a researcher who just talks about it, so he questions some things. The story says, Ray Blanchard is an American-Canadian sexologist who served as the head of clinical sexology services in the Law and Mental Health program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. In Toronto from 1995 to 2010, his research on paraphilias, gender identity disorders, and sexual orientation spans nearly 40 years from 2008 to 2012. He was a member of the Gender Identity Disorders Work Group for the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. That's DSM. So the 5th iteration. Now, I want to pull up something interesting. Actually, let's just read the beginning. Madeline Kearns asks, you believe transsexualism and gender dysphoria to be a mental disorder. Am I correct in saying that's how it appears in the DSM-5, the current edition of the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the Bible of psychiatry? Blanchard responds, yes. The diagnostic entity is called gender dysphoria in DSM-5. It was first introduced in DSM-3 under the name transsexualism, and it was still called transsexualism or gender identity disorder. I forget which in DSM-4. But in DSM-5, the name of the entity got changed to gender dysphoria, but the diagnostic criteria are fairly similar. He's asked, why was there a name change then? Was that to avoid the word disorder? And his response, yes, it was primarily to make patients and also trans activists and transsexual activist groups feel happy or that they had been listened to. But I would say that the name change probably owed as much to politics as it did any change in the science. So then he's asked, what does he mean by gender identity? And this is where there's a really interesting point being made. Blanchard says, back in the days when I was writing a lot on this topic, which is quite a while ago, I tended to avoid the phrase gender identity because I think it's a trivial concept when it's applied to normal people. I mean, normal men and normal women know what sex they are, and they respond to that automatically, like when looking for a washroom. But I think it's only at very unusual moments that a normal man or woman has a conscious awareness of I'm a woman or I'm a man, and this is often a highly emotional situation. So I don't find the concept of gender identity useful for normal people. And the concept of cross-gender identity is really not a normal gender identity which has found itself lodged in... let me start over. And the concept of cross-gender identity is really not a normal gender identity which has found itself lodged in the wrong body. Cross-gender identity is a constant preoccupation with and unhappiness about the individual's gender. So I guess you could say, I believe in cross-gender identity, but I don't much believe in gender identity. This is really interesting because I've thought about this too, especially when it comes to identity politics. It was a really weird moment for me when I went to Occupy Wall Street, and all of a sudden this conversation around identity and race, gender, and etc. came about because people were confused as to what I am. For those that listen to me regularly, you know Tim Pool is a mixed race person. Yeah, we get it. It's a meme at this point. But the thing is, I never had a moment of racial identity. Never in my life. There were a few points growing up where it made me realize that I was potentially in some kind of out group. You know, when the vehicle, my family vehicle was vandalized, our home was vandalized. You know, people don't like certain things. But my friend group was mixed. There was no point where I sat down, looked in the mirror and said, what am I? I was always just me. My friends were what they were. And it wasn't until the identitarian left started to gain traction, and I first encountered them at Occupy Wall Street, that I started to have a concept of I must be a thing. And I feel like that's one of their stated goals. They want to segment people. It's what they did at Occupy Wall Street. They created caucuses, so they called them, and they were bodies that had voting power based on your identity. And that was, in my opinion, nightmarish. In my conversation with David Pakman, he said it was interesting that my opposition to identity politics is, I say I oppose it, but then immediately defer to my identity. And I think that's a general misunderstanding. David thought aha, I see, what you're saying doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make sense to you. For me, I have kind of a negative identity when it comes to race, because I've never really had one. And then when it comes to the fact that I'm not, I'm a mudblood, as it were, then in reference to Harry Potter, for those that don't know, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, I'm trying to be funny. For me, to see that I don't fit in with either group, right? The far left hates white people, and the white nationalists don't like mixed race people. Where do I go? Identity politics is a bad thing because it excises people who don't fit into neatly defined boxes. So it's really interesting then when it comes to the idea of gender identity, because I've also never had one of those. There was never a moment for me where I looked in the mirror and was like, wow, I'm a guy. What does that mean? And thought about it. I just went about my business and did things. And like he points out, when I go to the bathroom, I look for the little dude symbol. It was never an issue until Occupy Wall Street and until, as recently. We'll read a little bit more of this. I don't want to go too much. The main point I wanted to drive in this video is less about trans issues, activism, and ideology, but more so the risk of censorship and science denialism. So I feel like I've definitely hit that point. We could probably move on, but I'll just say a couple more things. Right now, there are a bunch of activists on the left who are getting banned on Twitter because people on the right-wing activists have realized, I believe it's Saul Alinsky, make your enemy play by their own rules. So what they've done now is they're actually targeting left-wing activists and mass reporting them. They formed groups to seek out Antifa and report them, and many of them have started getting banned and getting locked out. I believe several permanent suspensions have already hit many left-wing activists. I can only really say you reap what you sow. But then I have to, for me, there's the conundrum of it's about principle. So do I like the idea that there are individuals who are upset about censorship using the tools to impose censorship? Yes, I think that's hypocritical. You have to be the only person standing up for what you believe in, even if it means you get knocked down first, right? I will absolutely not target someone for saying things that I don't think anyone should be banned. I don't think Louis Farrakhan should have been banned, right? And that's the point. Often you'll see people on the left say, when we criticize Antifa, that we're calling for censorship. No, we're pointing at a double standard, that you can't have rules that only impact one group of people. But this instance with Ray Blanchard is probably one of the more, disconcerting instances. Yes, there will, it's just plain and simple. What do you think's going to happen to all my lefty friends when the oil industry realizes they can buy up massive portions of Twitter stock and then start banning anybody who pushes the idea of global warming or climate change because it's bad for business? That's what we're walking into. We shouldn't allow it. I'll leave it there. I got some more videos coming up on, another video coming up on my main channel, youtube.com/timcast at 4 p.m. For those that are listening on the podcast, stick around. The next video will be starting, the next segment will start shortly.